Maya Angelou said, "I've learned that you can tell a lot about a person by the way they handle these three things: a rainy day, lost luggage, and tangled Christmas tree lights." There's a lot of profound wisdom there that goes much deeper than a surface rainy day or lost luggage or tangled Christmas lights. The wisdom that she's speaking about is we all encounter rainy days, hard days, sad days. Amen? We all experience loss. And we all get tangled up sometime. What she's really talking about is that she's reminding us that our character is not revealed in those times that are easy, but that our true character is revealed in times of difficulty and adversity. If you look back on your life, and I'm sure that the best stories you have to tell are probably stories that had a huge lesson learned. That challenges and heartaches, difficult times are definitely a part of life. But it's like the transition from a caterpillar becoming an amazing butterfly. You know, you could see that cocoon and think, well, I want to help and open it up, but actually you instead of helping, you would do the exact opposite. Because the caterpillar needs to know how to break through in order to develop its own wings, its own capabilities, in order to activate its potential. That the breaking through is literally an activating process, and it's essential to its own development and own realization. Today, in week 6 of the series, it is based on the book Living a Committed Life. It's about committing our life to a higher purpose. The theme this week is embracing difficult places and just knowing that it's a part of life. But our choice is, how do we embrace it? How do we be with it in such a way once we realize it's a part of life, it's a part of every life? Lynn writes in this book, she said, if you make a commitment, especially a commitment larger than your own life, if you make a commitment beyond what you know you're capable of, you will for sure be tested. Because it's in the process of becoming what you need to be that you discover who you can be. How many of you have realized that? One of the questions that we asked this week in our group study questions is, have you ever experienced personal growth or gained valuable insight as a result of dealing with an illness or a harsh challenge or an overwhelming situation? Well, every hand in here would go up, because anybody that's over the age of 2 or 3 has gone through something. And as a matter of fact, someone sent me this week grown-up lessons from children. And I thought, how appropriate, because this is Angela Martin, age 11. At age 11, she said, never give up, because life gets harder as you get older. After preschool, the road of life keeps getting bumpier and bumpier and bumpier. And Nick Coleman at age 9, don't think life is easy, because when you get older, it's hard work. I used to think life is easy. Now I have to do dishes every other day. And Lisa Colburn, a lesson that she has to offer, she said, never, ever blow in a cat's ear. Because if you do, after 3 or 4 times, they will bite your lip. So don't ever blow in a cat's ear. I grew up Pentecostal, and my sisters and I, we would play church growing up, and we had a cat, and I remember the day we thought it would be a good idea to baptize the cat. That was not a good idea. Learning to live is to grow is to change. We all know that. None of us are the same as we were. We're growing, we're changing, we're learning. But if you really look around, as we grow, as we face adversity, as we face the inevitable challenges that will come up in one's life, one of 2 things tends to happen. We either tend to grow bitter, or we tend to grow more deeper in compassion. We either tend to build our narratives, our stories, the way we think it should be, the way we try to keep things being, or we become truly more vulnerable. Not vulnerable. The word vulnerable is often thought as putting oneself at risk. That's not the vulnerable definition we're talking about. The root of the word vulnerable comes from the word courage, heart. It's to reveal your heart. To be vulnerable, what we're talking about here is to literally be real, to be authentic, so that you can discover what you're made of. And how do we do that by embracing those difficult times in our lives? When we face challenges and difficulties, usually the first thing that happens, you can rest assured, most of the time is going to be some sort of knee-jerk reaction. We gravitate toward pleasure. We move away from pain. It's part of our survival. That's a natural thing. It's a wise thing to do. And childbirth requires stretch marks. Going through some of the most difficult and challenging things in life will stretch us, will grow us. They will not necessarily be easy, and yet it doesn't mean that it's not a natural, necessary part of life. And so what we're talking about is how can we be in relationships with those things that are inevitable, the things that we have to work with, the things that are going on in the world right now that as much as we'd like to change them just like that, we're needing to tend to ourselves so that we can be present to what's going on. How do we do those things rather than retreat to resistance or retreat to our defensiveness? Because we will have a knee-jerk reaction and we will retreat to what's most comfortable and what's most familiar unless we become very conscious and self-aware and choose to respond in a different way. And so today that's what we're talking about, is how can we learn to respond in a different way? If we go back and look at a master teacher, Jesus, if you pull from one of the most well-known narratives that comes from the Bible is called the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. This kind of baffles a lot of people when you read it because it flies in the face of logic in some ways. Well, you have to put it in context to the audience. When these words were spoken, they were spoken to a group of people who were under the oppression of the Roman Empire. They were being spoken to people who lived largely in a caste system, a hierarchy, that the blessed people were the ones that belonged in this place. Everybody else was cursed or not blessed. There were some that were chosen and others that were not. And so to this large audience that had gathered, Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor." That was countercultural. Blessed are the poor? He said, "Blessed are those who mourn." Wait a minute, those who mourn? Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. You see, he was speaking to people who thought their lot in life was their lot in life. You get what you get. He was speaking to a group of people who thought that unless the emperor was blessed and the religious elite were blessed, and at best you may be able to make atonement, but they were really struggling with believing that they were a blessed people as well. And so he was saying, it doesn't matter if you're poor, you're blessed. Being blessed is not about being rich or poor. Being blessed is not about being meek. You are blessed. He said, "Blessed are the merciful, blessed are the pure in heart, blessed are the peacemaker." He was speaking to a group of people who thought that you had to find a way to live above the worries of life. You had to find a way to live above wherever you were in your situation. And what he was turning that upside down to say, you know what? You're blessed. That no matter your status in life, no matter your state, you're blessed. You're an original blessing. And that you have access to the presence of that which we call God, that the blessings and the presence of God are available for all of you, for every single person. Just to know that and to have that really sink in, that whatever I'm going through, whatever I'm facing, to let go of anything else and to sink into, at a soul level, I'm ultimately blessed. And there are spiritual blessings that are available to me. And so responding to life in that way, it's a reminder that despite the struggles we face, we have the power to shape our responses and ultimately to shape our destiny. Joseph Campbell said, "Opportunities to find deeper powers within ourselves comes when life seems most challenging, because where you stumble, there your treasure lies. Words of such wisdom. Where you stumble, there your treasure lies. That whatever appears to be in the way, my friends, is the way. It is the way for us to change how we are in relationship with us, to discover what is being called forth in each and every one of us. And so we want to break this down and look at what are some practical things. Yes, we know that learning and growth and hardships and going through difficult times, we know that's a part of life, of every life, of my life, of your life. We know that's a part of life. How do we begin to embrace it? How can we embrace it? What can we lean on when we find ourselves in those places? Well, things that we can lean on are love. We can lean into the blessing, lean into the learning, and what it means to extend yourself. We want to talk about those three things. And so the first one is to open to the love that is here. 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had a very powerful Sunday here, and it's when Israel and Palestine, the war had just begun. And the music went off. It was that time where we were just looking at television and the news and thinking, how can this be? And we had a good collective cry. You know, there's something very healing in that to love yourself, when you find yourself going through those difficult times, going through those difficult places, to lean into love, to let yourself to do whatever you need to do. I find a lot of times, especially in New Thought, people want to immediately rush to the positive affirmation. They want to do what I call a spiritual bypass and ignore what's going on and put a Band-Aid on it called a spiritual affirmation. And that's not the way it was intended to do. Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, was dying of tuberculosis. She never denied that. She never stopped doing things in the physical realm to help herself, but she did begin to also claim her spiritual truth, her spiritual identity. It's not an either or, it's a both and. And so when we find ourselves facing challenges, don't feel like it's wrong to have a good cry. Now, I encourage you to do it in a safe place. A meltdown in the mall is usually not encouraged, but find a place, create those opportunities to let it all down, to call on one another. Lena Horne, how many of you recognize the name Lena Horne? She was born in 1917 and lived until 2010. She was 92 years old. Lena Horne was a famous jazz singer and actress. She was also very active in the civil rights movement, but she was probably best well known for being one of the first African American performers to ever be signed by Hollywood. And so you can imagine, we're talking about the early 1900s. This is a black woman who's putting herself out there. Do you think she received any resistance? Absolutely she did. She had all kinds of resistance and prejudice and stuff coming at her. But if you have ever looked at her, she carried herself with a grace and an elegance throughout her life. As I said earlier, she lived to be 92 years young. And someone asked her later in life, they said, Lena, how did you do it? She said, well, this is what I've learned, that it's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it. It's the way you carry it. She said, I learned to love myself. I learned to love myself through the difficult places. I learned to call on and find those people that would support me through that. Wisdom comes in so many places if we're looking. How many of you recognize this name? Ted Lasso. A fictional character, popular television show, sitcom. For those of you that are not familiar, Ted was a successful college football coach in this television story until he decides he wants to challenge himself and take the head coaching job for a struggling English Premier League soccer team. And so this whole series, you're really following this guy who calls himself a work in prog mess, that he's like a work in progress, a work in prog mess. But there's this poignant at the final show of the season. He's worked with this team, and they've really grown. They've learned so much, but then they lose, and they face defeat. And so he's got this team sitting in the locker room, and this is what he said. He said, now look, this is a sad moment right here for all of us. And there ain't nothing I can say standing in front of you right now that can take that away. But please do me this favor. Will you lift up your heads and look around this locker room. Look at everybody else in here, and I want you to be grateful that you're going through this sad moment with all these other folks. Because I promise you, there's something out there worse than being sad, and it's being alone and sad, and ain't nobody in this room alone. And so I could say the same thing, look up. There's no one in this room that is alone. That when we lean into love, even in those darkest hours, when you are in those times alone, you're never really alone, because a spiritual power and a presence, I believe when the scriptures say the angels encamp around us, how many of you have ever felt the presence of angels or spirit or a higher power? I believe that with everything in me, because there's been some of the most desperate times in my life that I've heard the voice or felt the presence or something just moved over me that literally changed me. So to know that when we lean into love, we're opening ourselves to that. When we're going through those times, the first thing we can do is do it from a state of knowing that in my soul I am blessed, and let me lean into love, whatever that looks like for you. So number one is love. Number two, when we're going through our challenges and difficult times, is to open to the learning. Now, I'm not saying sometimes what gets practiced is what I would call metaphysical malpractice. I remember at my time in my life having a diagnosis and going through a very difficult time, and someone said, "What do you think it is in your consciousness that's causing that?" And I said, man, God, I don't ever want to say that or come from that place with anybody. That's not the time or the place. Love first. Love first. Sometimes we can know what's the cause, but the learning to me is about, okay, I'm in this situation, I'm going through this challenge. How can I grow in self-understanding? How can I grow in compassion? How can I grow in learning? One of the most powerful prayers you can ever pray is reveal what needs to be revealed and heal what needs to be healed. Reveal what needs to be revealed and heal what needs to be healed. And to be gentle with yourself as you're going through those times, that to open to the learning, yes, to open to whatever blessing can be found, because hard things can happen, and yet there still can be some glimmer of goodness, some hope. And so it's not to say that this is not happening. It's not to try to glaze over it. As a matter of fact, it's to lean into it and know that something else is breaking through here. Something else is being born. Something else is happening. And so how can what is there for me to learn? What can I gain? How can I be blessed? And if you authentically cannot get to that place yet, do yourself in the world a favor and stay in love. Sometimes the greatest thing you can do for healing is to do no harm. Amen? That if we would tend to our own brokenness, tend to our own hurt, there's times, I've said before, I feel like I should be walking around with a sign that says, beware under construction. that you're just really in the midst of something. You have to know that and to take care of yourself. Otherwise, we're just broadcasting that brokenness all over the place. So to be tender and gentle with yourself. As so often happens when I'm working on a talk, the people that I encounter, the things that I encounter are speaking to this very thing. There were 3 very specific conversations I had this week with some of the individuals that are in this room today. The first one is Judy McCowan, and I have permission to share all of these stories, but Judy volunteers with us. She's a retired CPA. She helps the church in so many ways. And the week before last, when I was on vacation, I got a text that said Judy had broken her kneecap and her elbow. And when I talked to her about it later, I found out she was going to a yoga class. Now, talk about going to do the right thing, going to work out. You're walking into your yoga class, sidewalk's uneven, you trip, you break your kneecap and your elbow. That's painful. That really sets you back a bit. And when I was talking to Judy, she said, I know that there's always something to be gained. And she said, for me, what came up is community, especially this one. She said, people immediately popped up to bring meals, to supply helpful equipment, to do Reiki, to offer encouraging words and helping hands. And to also make it easier on my husband, Steve, who now knows the difference between the washer and the dryer. He's had to take on everything. And so we can laugh. And yet what we all know that sometimes when we find ourselves in those situations, especially when we're one that I've never broken a bone before, I've always been the one that brought somebody soup. I've always been the one to show up. When we find ourselves the one in the couch or in the bed, we realize what it feels like to be loved from a distance. And you also realize how much of a gift it is to let somebody help you. That those people that do deliver a meal or do send the Reiki or the card or the call, that it's a blessing to them as well. The second individual that I talked to this week shared with me an incredible story about they grew up not in the United States. They grew up in southeastern Europe, in the Balkan Peninsula, near the Black Sea. Went to school in Romania. And this young woman that grew up in that area had challenges at home, was able to leave and come to the United States where she has made a life for the past number of years. But back in 2020, something happened and she needed to go back to her home country. Now, when we say back to 2020, you all go, oy vey, we know what that was like. So having to travel during COVID, be in another country. She had been estranged from her father. It had always been a challenging situation and had been estranged from her father for over 20 years. She finds herself in 2020 back in her home country, having to take care of a piece of business, and has COVID. Comes down with COVID, and of course now can't travel, has to go somewhere and be sequestered for 10 days or 14 days. And so this person said, I honestly didn't know what to do. And so when I tuned within, I heard, call your father. She's like, I haven't spoken to my father in over 20 years, and besides, he would never help me. He hates me. Call your father. Finding yourself not in this country anymore, in a dire situation, she's able to find him, calls her father, and to her surprise, he says, please come over, stay here, stay as long as you need. So she's there, sick with COVID. His new wife is helping take care of her. She said they're absolutely amazing, how welcoming they are. And one day, her father's wife tells her, she points to a picture on the wall and says, see this saint? There's a picture of a saint. She said, you should know that for the past several years, your father has been praying to that saint every day to be reunited with you. You just never, ever know. Sometimes we see the blessings and sometimes we don't get to see the blessings. But as we lean into love, this individual told me, she said, I had done so much work and the person that I was, I actually had no condemnation. My heart was free. I was able to do it. I was afraid that he may not. But she had worked with her heart and was received, and now there's a relationship going on. The third person that I talked to this week was Peter Gollop. Peter is the artist that designed these incredible, beautiful wooden wings. And as I was meeting with Peter and his wife Karen Eve this week, I said, hey, I saw pictures of you on Facebook. You were in Europe recently, right? He said, yeah, we were in Spain and in France, I believe. And I said, well, I noticed you walking with a cane. And he said, I was. And we talked for just a few minutes about how as we get older, our knees and our ankles and our hips, and sometimes things don't work the way they once did. And so he's traveling through Europe with a cane, not able to do all the things that he could have done. And he said, but the thing about it was, if you have a cane, you often get to go to the front of the line. He said, if you have a cane, people respond to you in a much nicer way. He said, it really does work. As a matter of fact, he said, when I go to Europe next year, I'm going to take a cane and wear an eye patch. Peter, there's his cane. There's so many lessons to be learned. We all face challenges, we all face heartaches, we all face difficulties, but how do we lean into them? Well, we love, we place ourselves in love, we repeat daily, doing what we need to do. We open to the learning. That's a very personal thing. Just because you had an experience with this and you learned this and you went through that, don't think that becomes the gospel for everyone. Amen. I've often said there's a couple of scriptures in the Bible where there was a blind person and their eyes were healed because it said Jesus placed mud in their eyes. And then there was another blind person healed and they did not place mud in their eyes. And I would imagine that's when the first two denominations started, the Muddites and the Neo-Muddites. Because they said, oh, you have to do it this way. And then they said, oh, no, but you have to do it this way. Your learning, your healing, your blessings, it's a very personal thing. And so give others the grace and the space to find that for themselves as well. So we go through challenges, we love, we learn. And number 3, we stretch. Again, as you are ready, but probably before you feel completely ready. You'll be called to stretch. It's called extending yourself. Now listen to the language in here. When we say extend yourself, how many of you know you have a self that's sitting there in that chair, but you have a self that is the Holy Spirit? You have a self to you that is beyond the form that you are. When you begin to extend yourself and put yourself out there, when you begin to give of yourself, that's the purpose of this whole book. It's about giving and being for a purpose that's larger than my own life. When I become an instrument of, a vessel for, the way of, when we put ourselves out there, healing happens. Leo Buscaglia, who was known as Dr. Love, he grew up in Italy, spent the first 5 years of his life in Italy, and then moved to the United States with his parents. When he first came to the United States and was 5, 6 years old and went to school, this was a number of years ago, and he couldn't speak any English at all, they put him in a class with, at the time, what were labeled the mentally retarded. Years ago, that's how the school system worked. And Leo said for him, it was one of the most impressionable things on him because he was put in with a group of other people who all had labels on them. And he said he learned at a very young life the power of living beyond the label, of what it means to really be of service and extend yourself beyond the label or the limitation, beyond whatever comes up. He told a story about traveling, and he got stuck in Chicago because it was snowing and the flight had been canceled, and so he, with a whole plane full of people, are stuck there in the airport terminal. If you've ever had that happen to you and you're truly just stuck, what happened was they brought out the beverage carts and the snack trays, and so they let people have beverages and snacks because you're snowbound, you're stuck there for a while. And he said there was just a whole bunch of people in the group he was in. He said there was one man in particular who just kept yelling about he had to get to Pittsburgh. That the flight attendant who was trying to help finally said, "Sir, I want you to get to Pittsburgh probably even more than you do," because the man was just yelling so much. And Leo said it was just so awful. And even though they had the snacks and the drinks, everybody over there was awful. He went to the restroom, and when he came back, he realized there were so many people that spilled across the aisle, and there was a whole other group of people that were on the same flight that had been canceled and were snowbound. But these whole group of people, he said it literally looked like a party going on. And there were a lot of children. It looked like all the families had gravitated over there. So he went over to find out what in the world was the difference. He knew there was a man yelling over here, setting the tone for that whole area. But over here, as it turned out, there was a 75-year-old woman who had been a preschool teacher. And as she was sitting there and she was noticing some of the parents with their children, she just simply said, "I used to be a preschool teacher. I'd be happy to help." She extended herself just a little bit. By extending herself just a little bit and saying, "I can help. This is what I can do." More kids began to gather around. The snacks all of a sudden became a party. It was a whole different thing. Leo said there's 2 big forces at work in everybody's life, external and internal. And we have very little control over the external forces, such as tornadoes and earthquakes and floods and disasters and canceled plane flights and sometimes illness and sometimes pain. But what really matters is the internal force, how I respond, to remember that all of life is a choice. He said too often we underestimate the power of extending ourselves, the healing power of extending ourselves just a little bit. The power of a touch, of a smile, of a kind word, of a listening ear, of an honest compliment, or the smallest act of caring, all of which have the potential to turn a moment around, and then a situation around, and then an entire life around. This week we're talking about how can we be in relationship to the things that we find challenging? Well, number one is it has to begin with love. Love. And then to open to the learning, to the gifts, to the blessing. And as we can, be willing to remember that life is about extending ourselves, giving what you can, knowing that you are making a difference. I want to invite our band to come up, and Nova, if you'll get ready. In 1922, the founders of Unity are called Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. This whole Unity movement began because one woman had a crisis in her life. Myrtle Fillmore in the late 1800s had a diagnosis of tuberculosis. She had 3 sons. She was in the end stages of her life. She was dying. She didn't want to die. She was doing the best that she could. And long story short, something happened where she heard that what changed for her was an idea, a belief about who she was and what could be possible. What she heard was, I'm a child of God and I inherit the life of God. I don't inherit sickness, I inherit the life of God. And for her, that led to a healing which took about 18 months. So one woman in a crisis, her life changes. The people that had been around her, their lives changed. Her husband, Charles Fillmore, it totally changed his life. People began to gather and pray. In 1919, they began to buy some land. They bought about their first 40 acres, which today is over 1,200 acres, a place called Unity Village. It's the headquarters in Kansas City, Missouri. They began to buy land because they wanted to create a space for people to come together in spiritual exploration, spiritual community, praying together, learning, growing. Well, in 1922, they had not yet started any building, but in 1922 in Kansas City, Kansas was one of the first places to go live with radio. And so in 1922, the Kansas City radio station WOQ had started broadcasting, and Charles Fillmore said, you know, we have learned so much. We need to share, we need to extend ourselves and put that message out there. So Unity actually became, through Charles Fillmore, one of the first ever spiritual organizations to put theirself out over the radio. Now, in 1926, by 1926, the Kansas City Journal reported that Unity's voice was being heard as far as Nigeria. They knew that it was winding up in Australia because this was before the FCC came in, and Charles Fillmore was trying to get the transmitters to go as far as they could, and they were. So a woman is healed. They're leaning into love. They're learning. They're extending themselves. They're putting the message out there. The message is going all the way to Nigeria. The people in Nigeria are open to these ideas. As the years progress in Nigeria, Unity begins to grow. And more people are asking, we want to learn this. We want to have churches. We want this. 2 years ago, we had a young woman that was brought to the attention of our church who is in Nigeria, and her name happens to be Blessing. It came to my attention that there was a young woman in Nigeria who had been watching online and wanted to become a Unity minister in Nigeria. And so we extended ourselves. We made a commitment and took that on. And today I'm so happy to be able to bring to you Blessing from Nigeria.
Hello everyone, this is Blessing Akwanabasi from Nigeria. I thought I'd express my gratitude once more for the love and support you have shown me in various ways. My ministerial classes have brought me so much value. Apart from the obvious fact that I'm learning a lot of useful tools that help me see the world from a perspective that is most beneficial, and help me take the most productive actions in any situation. There's also the fact that I'm so happy to be able to discuss these ideas personally with like minded people, and I'm able to participate in a more active way. I used to feel like the odd one out, the outsider peeping in from the window, trying frantically to get in. I've wanted so long to belong to a community that resonates with me, where I can not only learn but also participate fully, even though virtually. And having the opportunity to be a part of these classes has given me just that. This really means a lot to me. I'm so grateful for the opportunity. I'm so grateful for all that I am learning. I'm so grateful for the way it's transforming my life. I'm grateful for the tools you sent and enabled me to get, which makes all this possible. The scholarship, the books, the laptop, the printer, everything. You have really, really made a great difference in my life. And I would also do my best to bring my contributions to the world in every way that I can. Thank you so much.
Listen. Yeah. I wish I could bring Myrtle Fillmore. I know she has seen it. You see, you never know when you might cry. It struck me one time reading the 23rd Psalm, which is probably one of the most popular. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And there preparest a table before me, not in the absence of my adversaries, not in the absence of my hard times. Thou preparest a table before me, not in the absence of, but in the presence of. In the presence of. Our world is in the midst of great pain. Many of you are. And yet there is a joy that is so sweet. There's a peace that is so stable. There is a purpose and a picture that is so much bigger that it gives us exactly what we need to lean into love, to learn, to grow, and most of all, to extend ourselves just a little. Because by extending ourselves, you never ever know how far it may travel, how the ripple effects may literally change a life, may literally change a community, may literally change a company. You just never know. And so I hope you will be gentle with yourselves and gentle with one another. And so join me in this beautiful song by the late Reverend Sky St. John that says, gentle spirit flow in me, gentle spirit grow in me. I got it backwards. Gentle spirit grow in me, gentle spirit know in me. Sing this one again. Gentle spirit flow in me, gentle spirit show in me, gentle spirit grow in me, gentle spirit know in me. I invite you to close your eyes. And when you close your eyes, I invite you to smile. When you smile, it literally activates your physiology. It sends a message throughout your being that says, be lifted. I am lifted. I can shine. I can show myself. It's okay. All is well. We together remember that there's definitely hard times. There are challenges. It's a part of life. It's a part of every life. And blessed are those times if we can open to love. And so we open our hearts and our willingness to lean into love, to what it means to be authentically vulnerable, that our heart may be revealed to us, that what constitutes our spirit can rise up within us. And so we lean into love. And we open to learning. When we take time to realize that when we feel like we're just knocking our head against the wall or every day keeps knocking us down, we take care of ourselves, but we also say, what is the lesson? What is the gift? What can I take from this? How can I be transformed? We cultivate that level of receptivity, not in any way to beat ourselves up. It's all bathed in love, but it's about conditioning a receptivity. It's like the prophet Jeremiah said, we become clay in the potter's hands. We become malleable. Teach me, guide me, show me. Reveal what needs to be revealed. Heal what needs to be healed. And then as we are able, we become willing to extend ourselves. That when we put ourselves out there, so to speak, when we do what we can, we give what we can, we offer what we can, when we choose to create the atmosphere that says, I'm going to make lemonade out of lemons, when we choose to create the atmosphere that can bring people together instead of drive people apart, when we choose to create an atmosphere of healing and joy and true remembrance, then healing and joy and truth will show up. And so may we be the people with the hearts and the willingness and the tenderness to be broken open in a way that we're meant to be, so that the light may shine forth in a way that is beautiful and loving. And for this we are truly grateful. So gentle Spirit flows in me, gentle Spirit shows in me, gentle Spirit grows in me, gentle Spirit knows in me. I invite you to open your eyes and bring that smile back with you and wiggle your fingers and toes and stand up as you can. So gentle Spirit flows in me, gentle Spirit shows in me, gentle Spirit grows in me, gentle Spirit knows in me. One more time, hit it, band. Gentle Spirit grows in me, gentle Spirit shows in me, gentle Spirit grows in me, gentle Spirit knows in